Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing an art journal page with you. Here I'm cutting a piece of A4 card into an A5 piece of card because this is going to be going into one of my filofaxes, which is going to be my art journal filofax. I like doing art journal pages on loose leaf paper because I find that it's more versatile than doing it in a bound book. It doesn't become as bulky, you can take each page out and do it separately, so you don't worry about paint staining previous pages or anything like that, so I like doing them on separate pieces of card or paper. Here I'm just choosing which distress inks to use in the background of my page. I'm trying to find a few that will go together nicely, so I'm picking out a few choices and then narrowing it down. So I've got Antique Linen, Barn Door, Wild Honey and Vintage Photo. And I keep my distress ink foams on a board, and so I'm just getting my distress inking tool, and I'm going to start with the lightest colour, which is Antique Linen. I chose this colour even though it's supposed to be the colour of linen because one of the first ink pads I got was old paper, which I don't think actually looks like old paper because it's far too green. I think Antique Linen looks more like an old paper colour. I like the idea of making a mini book that looks like distressed pages, like yellows and browns, to make it look like old paper and then making it look like it's about 100 years old or something. So that's something I'm going to do in the future, although this heavy concentration, like you can see on the page now, it won't actually look like old paper, but I'm still trying to learn how to do distress inking properly because it doesn't come out right if you do a heavy hand. You have to blend it properly from the out into the page, so your outside edges can look quite dark and then your inside can look quite pale because it's difficult to take the colour, or it's difficult for me to take the colour right into the middle. So I'm still practicing. I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert. I can get quite good at it if I have been doing it for a while, but I've had a while off doing anything with distress inks, so I've kind of fallen out of the habit. But I do find that this Wild Honey and Barn Door do blend very easily compared to the Antique Linen, so I do like these two colours. I think they're a nice combination because they're all warm colours. And here I've got Vintage Photo, which is the first distress ink pad that I actually bought. It's my favourite because it antiques pages perfectly. You can do the corners and the edges, and that's what I'm doing here, and it just makes it look, it can look old and vintage, but it also just makes it look sort of like it's tied in. Like if you do the edges of the pages, it doesn't look like a new fresh piece of paper. If you don't want the edges to be white or cream or the colour of the card, you want them to be nice and vintage looking, it's perfect. Here I'm taking out from my Vanderspec a sheet of images that I made. These images come from a stamping company that have really nice stamps, but I just use the images as inspiration. I've chosen to do a camera. I'm using their image as inspiration. So I've cut two circles, which will be the basis for the camera idea that I've got, and then I'm building up the rest of the cut out images. So I'm doing a rectangle and some smaller rectangles. And the circles will obviously be the camera's lens. And now I'm just doing the background of the camera itself, which is the rectangle, and I'm cutting it out and rounding the corners to look like one of those vintage cameras with the nice big lenses and rounded edges, rounded corners. And I'm just laying the pieces on top of each other to see where they'll go on the camera when I've finished it, and I think it looks quite good. So I'm just double checking the picture to see what I need to do next, and that will be colouring the camera in. So I'm choosing some distress ink pads. Obviously cameras are usually a metallic colour, so some sort of silvery colour. I don't have a grey or a silver ink pad, but I don't mind that. I'm just going to use other colours that I like. So I've chosen milled lavender, and that's tattered rose, and that's tumble glass, and those are the three I used for the background. So I'm doing the background of the camera in the milled lavender. I don't know if you can actually see this, it's very pale colour, and in the lighting it does look like I'm putting nothing on, but it is a very nice soft pale lilac colour. And now I'm going to do tumbled glass, which has a difficult to detach lid, so that was what I was struggling with there. I've made this additional part for the camera because I realised that I hadn't done the top strip of the camera, which is on all of the images, so I off camera actually cut that out. And what I realised was that on this thin strip it's quite difficult to distress ink it with the applicator because it's not a big piece of paper, it's a small piece of paper. So instead of doing round strokes, I'm doing long strokes across the piece of paper so that I don't end up bending it or tearing it. But it still blends in well, and you can build the colour up. So even though it's quite a pale blue, I do build it up and stop when I'm happy with it. And so I've got the camera, my own camera, next to me, so I can actually use that for reference as well as the images. And now I'm seeing what I need to do for the lens, which is to draw a grey circle, which is a normal component of a camera lens. I'm not very good at drawing freehand, but there I've built up the line so it's thicker, and I'm just touching it up to finish. And now I've got my smaller circle, which actually fits really well inside the circle that I've drawn, so I'm just finishing it off before I glue it together. And I'm going to write something in the middle of the lens in a minute. I'm taking inspiration for this one from Vicky P on YouTube, who makes amazing art journal pages and tags and birthday and other greetings cards. She is brilliant, and I will link her YouTube channel below. Her work is so professional and it just looks so beautiful. Sometimes I like to be messy and just splash paint around, but with this one I'm definitely being more careful and adding bits of paper, which is definitely more what she does. She builds up layers with different pieces of paper to make things more 3D, and so that's the style I'm using today. So I'm using my ATG gun to glue the bigger parts, like the lens and the strip at the top, and I'm just making sure it's in the right place before I press it down, because it's difficult to lift up if you've put it down in the wrong place. And then for the smaller things, it's difficult to use the ATG gun, so I'm gluing it with some PVA on spatula, on one of those kiddie ones. I think they're very useful and they're really cheap from the craft shop, so I'm using one of those. But you've got to be careful because PVA is water-based, and any water-based glue will react with the distress ink. So if you aren't careful, you might reactivate the distress ink and make it a bit like you're bringing the colour up again, so you have to be careful. And now I'm just going to add some detail to the viewfinder on the top of the camera, and I've just chosen the colour out of my felt tip pens. I don't have any nice pens, I just use children's felt tip pens and I find they're just brilliant. And so I've used pencil to outline to give the detail some depth. and I'll be doing that on the rest of the camera in a minute. And I'm just positioning the viewfinder a little bit above the top line of the camera so that it looks like it does in real life. Now I'm doing the pencil to add some depth around the elevated parts of the camera, around the bits that I've stuck on, and I've done that around most of it. I'm just going to touch up the line underneath the extra strip I've added, and what this does is it makes it look more 3D rather than flat, which it can do if you're looking at it head on. And now I'm going to glue the camera onto the actual page. So I'm happy with it where that's gone, and now I'm going to add the buttons on the camera, which I didn't want to do with pieces of paper stuck on. I was actually going to draw them on because it's less fiddly. They're only small black marks, so it doesn't take too long. And I find that the felt tip isn't very easy to do detail with, so I get another fine point pen to just touch up the edges and make sure that the corners are neat. And now I'm taking this children's stencil to write the words on the page, and in a minute you will see what I've spelled out. There we go. It says photosynthesis, which obviously photo for the camera, and then you'll have to see what I do in a minute for the synthesis part. I'm doing the photo in black felt tip and the synthesis in green felt tip, colouring it in. There we go. And now for the synthesis part. Obviously photosynthesis is the way that plants create energy from sunlight using the chlorophyll I think it is, in their leaves. I am using some stamps that are flowers and plants and a tree to bring some nature into it. Most of my work does have natural elements to it. I've actually got this stamp here that looks like part of a reel of film, so I'm just adding that. I got a piece of blank paper, as you could see a minute ago, and tested it out because this stamp is quite sticky for some reason and the ink doesn't react very well on it. But I didn't want it to be a full image, I wanted it to be kind of a patchy ghost image, so I don't mind that. I'm doing it in black because traditionally film is black, and I'm using a piece of paper underneath to stop my surface getting messy. So what I'm doing here is inking up a flower stamp, the top bit of the actual flower with purple ink and the bottom bit of the leaves with green ink, being careful not to overlap so I could get purple on my green ink pad. And there we go. And this is a tree stamp. Originally what I was going to do was basically the same as what I did with the flower and ink it up with two different ink pads, but because of the detail of the tree it's quite tricky to do, so what I decided to do was to get my felt tip pens and colour in the stamp with felt tips, and then use the huffing technique, which is basically breathing hot breath onto the stamp to rehydrate the ink and stamp it using that. So this means I can use more than one colour. So I've used brown for the trunk and the branches, light green for the new leaves, and a darker green for the older branches and leaves. And I've breathed on it, and now I'm pressing it down, and I think these images, if you do them carefully, can look even better than ink pad stamp images. And I've got a daffodil stamp. It's spring here at the moment, so I'm seeing daffodils everywhere, so I'm going to do some daffodils. I've got green for the stalk and yellow for the whole flower, and then I'm going to be colouring in the middle part, which is the bell-shaped part, with orange, because you do get variegated daffodils and they're very pretty, so I thought I'd do some like that. And daffodils always come in bunches, so I'm doing the stamp twice. I'm just touching it up with the same colours as I did before. I don't clean it out between times because I'm using the same colours. There we go, that's my stamping done. And I'm just looking at it and thinking I'll add some leaves to the daffodils. And I think that's one of the great things about stamps, is that you can add details to them. So if you see that something's a bit patchy, you can fill it in. Or what I'm doing here is thinking that the yellow doesn't look very bright, so I'm just touching up some of the petals of the daffodils, and I'll also go back in with the orange pen and do the outline of the middle part again in orange, so that it stands out more, because the yellow on the background doesn't look very bright, so it's better to bring it out again. And what I'm doing here is adding some sparkly clear glitter glue to the flash bulb part of the camera, because when that dries it will look a little bit more like a flash on a real camera. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching.